I want to congratulate the president and the provost on these new programs that you're starting here at the college. I want to ask, I was going to talk about healthcare disparities, but I don't think I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to change my remarks based upon what you say now. How many of you here, there's 3 new programs coming to your college. How many of you here are interested in journalism? Raise your hand. How many of you here are interested in pharmaceutical sciences? Raise your hand. How many of you here are interested in nursing? Raise your hand. How many of you are here because somebody made you come and you don't really want to be here? And a lot of people didn't raise their hand at all, so I'm wondering what you guys are doing here. So I'm going to just instead, I'm going to speak for about 10 minutes, so somebody cut me off if I go for too long. I'm going to talk about a couple different things. First, I'm going to talk about being in public life generally, but then I'm going to talk about what's wrong with, one of the things that's wrong with government today, and it's kind of a technical type of thing. It's not a philosophical thing, it's a technical type of thing, but it's important for people to understand. The first thing is I want to encourage everybody to be involved in public life in some way to try and change the real world, okay? When I was a kid, I think I was a tremendous idealist. I still consider myself to be an idealist. President Kennedy used to call himself an idealist without illusion. But people would always say I was very naive and I didn't know what I was talking about. They said, wait till you see what it's like in the real world. And I wrote in my law school application, the real world is not something you must simply face. The real world is something that we as free men and women must actively create. You make the real world. We make the real world. We decide what it's going to be. And I took that idealism and the idea of trying to change the world. I became the youngest mayor of my hometown. I was 31 years old. I was the youngest mayor in the history of the city of Glen Cove. I went on to become the youngest county executive and the first Democrat in 30 years, first one with a Democratic legislature since 1917. And I've been able to change things dramatically. In fact, I gave my the keynote speech Saturday at Fordham Law School Alumni Association at the Waldorf Astoria. 800 people, all judges and major leaders throughout the entire state of New York, based upon that original idea. The real world is not something you must simply face. The real world is something that we as free men and women actively create. So I want to encourage all of you to be people who help to create the real world, to help shape the real world. But I want to talk about something that's wrong with government today. The basic structural problem that exists in government and the efforts to try and solve problems today. And it's a very technical word, which basically means people are not talking to each other very much. So who remembers September 11th, 2001? Please raise your hand, okay? Now what happened on September 11th, 2001, we had a terrible terrorist attacks, and what happened? A wonderful police department showed up, a wonderful set of firefighters showed up, a wonderful set of EMS responders, emergency medical service responders showed up, and they couldn't talk to each other. They weren't interoperable. Their radios couldn't communicate with each other. And as a result, a lot of people died because they couldn't communicate with each other and the buildings fell down on a lot of people. And when you look behind that day, leading up to that day, we found out that a lot of the intelligence community, the CIA, the FBI, the immigration offices, other different bureaus of government throughout the country all had bits of information about what was going to be happening. That this attack was going to take place or something like it was going to take place. But the agencies were not interoperable. They were not communicating with each other. They were not sharing information with each other. Well, that affects the most basic things in government on a daily basis. You know, one of the reasons I got involved in politics in the first place, I'm a certified public accountant and I'm an attorney. I could have been making more money in the private sector. But I want to try and solve problems. I want to try and help people. I want to try and make the world a better place to live in. I want to improve the real world that I was talking about before. And one of the things I hear politicians give speeches on all the time is they get up and they say, it's better to educate a child instead of paying for a jail cell later on. And everybody applauds and they clap their hands and they talk about how it's so expensive to pay for prison cells. If only we could get the young people at an earlier stage and help them address the problems that they're facing in their life, they wouldn't end up with problems that result in them getting entangled in the law, in the legal system. So I've looked at that. Why aren't we doing a better job with that? What's the problems that we're with? There's no new money. Everybody sees the economy's falling apart. I don't know now where we have the highest property taxes in America. In New York State, we have the highest local taxes in America, the highest combined state and local taxes in the entire country. There's no new money available. So what, and we already spend more than most places in New York State. We spend more for healthcare, we spend more for education than any other place in the country. But we don't have any better results than other places. There's something structural that's wrong. And that's what I want to talk about. It has to do with this issue of interoperability, of people not working across their different lines. So it turns out that 75% of the people in jail, this is all over the country, 75% of the people in jail have a drug, alcohol, or mental health problem. 75% of the people in jail have a drug, alcohol, or mental health problem. But we don't do a good job dealing with drug, alcohol, mental health problems, and merge to become bigger and bigger problems, and they end up people get involved in crime to either support their habit or because of negative behavior, whatever it may be. So what are we doing to address that problem? Well, when it comes to law enforcement, it's not just one agency. In my county, where I've got a budget larger than 11 states in the United States of America, $2.6 billion, population 1.3 million people, larger than 11 states in America as well. We have law enforcement, and law enforcement includes the police department, but it also includes the district attorney, it involves the courts, it involves the jail, it involves probation, it involves the state, local, and federal systems, it involves parole. Those agencies don't necessarily communicate very well with each other across their different department lines, much less communicate outside of their culture of law enforcement. They're not necessarily very interoperable, the same as the firefighters and the police and the EMS were not interoperable on September 11, 2001. So that's one area, law enforcement. It's a whole big culture, it involves billions of dollars of spending, and it's a very important part of our society. It's not very interoperable within their own culture, but they're certainly not very interoperable with a world that deals with drug, alcohol, and mental health culture. The problems that end up getting most people into prison in the first place. That world is the world of health and human services. It's another multi-billion-dollar enterprise that exists all over our county, our city, our state, our country, and it involves the health department, the mental health department, drug and alcohol departments, veterans, seniors, youth, physically challenged, and a whole bunch of other departments, okay? And they don't necessarily communicate well with each other. They're not necessarily interoperable amongst themselves, but they're certainly not that interoperable with the law enforcement community. It's a whole separate world. And then, out in suburbia,